So I think let's go 2 minutes each. How about that?
Rod, I think, Rod, that was a serious objection you made. That was interesting, and you raised serious points that those of us who support China, we have to try to answer those objections that you raised. I think what Hinton was responding to, and that people at the time were responding to, Hinton criticized, people who don't know, Bill Hinton, in that book, Bill Hinton criticized the Chinese party, broke with it, and abandoned Chinese communism. He died kind of a lonely. I knew Clinton. He stayed at my house when he was here in the Bay Area. I knew him not real well, but I knew him. So anyway, I knew his family. I know he died kind of a lonely old guy in a nursing home, a tragic kind of way to die for a really great man. But anyway, Hinton, like other people, were shocked because this was a very difficult transition to Marxist socialism that began, under Deng. And that really disrupted people's iron rice bowl. It caused inflation, as you pointed out, and it caused real problems in the economy. And everybody, all the enemies of China, all the critics like Hinton and the others, they all said, this will ruin China. This will destroy the Chinese economy. And just as they were making these criticisms in 1990, the Chinese economy took off. And all their predictions about the failure of communism, neoliberalism, the introduction of capitalism, all that, it turned out to be completely false. China took off. The Chinese economy is #2 in the world. It's a socialist economy with ownership by the working class of the major means of production, Communist Party in power, the same one that crushed the counter-revolution in 1989. And so, yeah, these were serious objections. And at the time, there were real dislocations. And I think the party made very serious errors. And this was where I agree with Raj. The party made extremely serious mistakes during this time by not addressing effectively these objections and the suffering that people had. And then even worse, the party was slow to attack the counter-revolutionaries. They were slow to respond. What is happening in Hong Kong? Is this happening again in Hong Kong? I mean, we're now, we have to live through this history. And in Hong Kong, what is happening today? So we have this kind of a mass. Yes, as Lotus pointed out, Hong Kong, because it's under capitalism, it's not really under Chinese control. Wages are declining, people are suffering. They don't have the kind of optimism that people in China have. In China, your wages go up every year. You're richer, you're happier, you're better fed, you're better educated, you have better transportation. Hong Kong, everything is private. The money in Hong Kong is issued by private banks. They don't even have a state currency. Hong Kong is totally under capitalist control, and yes, conditions are going to worsen in Hong Kong, but it's not the fault of communism. The conditions are getting worse in Hong Kong. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Wait.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Lotus, where you at?
She's busy talking in the
Yeah,
back
I
of the
know.
room.
I know. But
So Marilyn.
this is for you, Lotus, just so you understand. When I grew up during the McCarthy period, as I stated before, my family, my father and all had joined the Communist Party during the World War II. And, there weren't many, but there were black people that defected from the Communist Party due to the pressures of McCarthy. Wasn't many, to be honest with you. A lot of people that may have walked away from the Communist Party did not run into the arms of the racists. Just out of self-respect, they shut their traps. Now, I got to tell you, I hate traitors. You might be a dumb traitor, you might be a weak traitor, you might be a lovable traitor, I don't care. I hate traitors. All right, so understand I'm disfigured a little bit from seeing people, black people, so well. I can go on and on. People that found it convenient to turn against the Communist Party during I'll say again, not many, but there were. And I was trained to hate these people. And I just understand we're from different backgrounds, and I apologize if I seem irrationally aggressive on this matter of smashing counter-revolution, but I do hate traitors. Students are a social grouping in transition. So on a certain level, it don't matter what students come up with, but it's the working class that matters. And I think this brother over here made a point that, you see, students, that's your job. You're supposed to read books and study and think high ideals. Well, workers, we working, we scratching, and the little teeny bit of time we get, we try to self-cultivate a bit, okay? And consequently, workers are always gonna be, the reaction of actual workers is gonna be slow to figure out the orientation, what's going on. But just know this, the working class population in Beijing was very sympathetic to the students initially. So when they sent the troops in, people laid down in front of the tanks. They went out and blocked the streets and stopped the the People's Liberation Army from advancing on the square. Now, is that an anti-communist act? Or is that an act where the workers felt some sympathy for the students and were trying to be humanitarian and prevent a massacre? If I see tanks rolling to 14th Street and Broadway, I'm figuring there might be something ugly about to happen. That doesn't make you an anti-communist. So we should be careful, thoughtful about, categorizing some of this stuff. I think we are ignorant. We are ignorant, we are full of anti-communism, and we're too silly to just admit it and try to do better. One of the things, all the young people I know, almost without exception, believe that China is a capitalist country. It's wrong. Please teach children to study the new economic policy under the Soviet Union. And then they can begin to understand what is actually going on in China today. And above all, American workers and militants and people that are supposed to be political should understand the main enemy is at home.
2 minutes.
Okay, so I just wanted to respond also to the criticism. At the time, we were very critical of the Chinese leadership, particularly on the basis of the breaking of the Iron Rice Bowl, of the guarantees, the breaking of the guarantees for healthcare and education and so forth. But I think that those policies formed part of the initial demonstrations. There was no question about it. But they were heterogeneous. The demonstration was very heterogeneous at the beginning. So you had people who were, on the one side, I think from the more working class side, critical of the government for the breakdown of policies of social policies. At the same time, you had the children of a rising privileged class, more privileged class, who wanted to go much further, who wanted to get rid of the system altogether. They were together. And it was that group that emerged as the leadership.
At the end.
Well, at the end, but at the end in a kind of decisive way. And one quote I couldn't find, this was from the Washington Post on June 12th. On one avenue in western Beijing, demonstrators torched an entire military convoy of more than 100 trucks and armored vehicles. Aerial pictures of conflagration and columns of smoke have powerfully bolstered the Chinese government's argument that the troops were victims, not executioners. Other scenes show soldiers' corpses and demonstrators stripping automatic rifles off unresisting soldiers. And even a week before, on June 5th, the Washington Post had written that anti-government fighters had been organized into formations of 100 to 150 people. They were armed with Molotov cocktails and iron clubs, and of course later they got rifles by the other means. So the reason I'm saying this, and this goes for Chai Ling too, and proclaiming herself the commander-in-chief of Tiananmen Square, she has responsibility for those kind of violent attacks. Wang Dan who was, we talk about the workers, he was another leader of the movement. The pursuit of wealth is part of the impetus for democracy, he said. But then more tellingly, he says, the movement is not ready for worker participation because democracy must first be absorbed by the students and intellectuals before they can spread it to others. So what does that show us? They're making crystal clear the class character of the leadership. And that leadership was bourgeois, and that leadership had strong support within the Chinese Communist Party at the top level, Zhao Ziyang and others. And that what it was, and I think this is a reason why we have to emphasize this side of it today, is that if that side and the violent attacks on the military that took place were an attempt to push the situation to an absolute crisis and to break the party and to break the state, and that would mean the restoration of capitalism. The restoration of capitalism would have meant, I think, for China, the restoration of colonialism. Mm-hmm. I mean, look what happened to the Soviet Union. I mean, what happened in the 1990s to the Soviet Union? China was far less developed and far less removed from colonialism. I don't think there's any question that the country, or at least very little question that the country would have broken up, and it would have been, an incredible victory for world imperialism. And a defeat for the Chinese people as a whole.
Thank you. Gene?
Okay, I want to apologize for the disorder because we'd set up this to talk about Tiananmen Square and the myths and so forth. But about a week ago, all these things started happening in Hong Kong, and I said if we're going to talk about China at all, we need to include some discussion of Hong Kong. And so that meant we had to rearrange our slideshows and do other kinds of things. And the other option would have been saying, we're not going to talk about Hong Kong, which I think would be a mistake. So I want to apologize that I really I've always been a respected PSL/Workers' World, because that's my basic understanding way back in the 1990s about what went on in Tiananmen. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate everybody else. Lotus and other people having their comments. That being said, I just want to say one thing. I stress the idea that we should respect what the Chinese think they're doing, because they see themselves as a socialist state under the dictatorship of the proletariat as defined by Marxism-Leninism. That should suggest we go back and read Lenin, what he said about the dictatorship of the proletariat. And he said it was a life and death struggle between the proletariat and a more powerful enemy, the international bourgeoisie, because they become even more powerful after they're overthrown in one country. So he stresses the fact that this is really a life and death struggle, and the proletariat, whether they're in the Soviet Union or China, are confronted with a more powerful enemy. And they need to understand this. The other thing, I think if you read Lenin, again, he says that, and he describes the dictatorship of the proletariat as a bludgeon that they use to fight against the capitalist class. And he said, we will use this bludgeon until there are no more capitalists anywhere in the world. And he stressed that, saying that is the position of our Communist Party. So that is Leninism, that is the dictatorship of the proletariat. I think we need to study that as well as what's going on in China. But also, I've done a fair amount of reading in Lenin, and I haven't seen anywhere where he says there will be no mistakes made by the dictatorship of the proletariat, that the party will make no mistakes, is not perfect. Marx said, this period is going to be, there will be defects. That's inevitable. So I just want to think we need to take a good look at what the Chinese think they're doing and respect that. So, but anyway, I really thank everybody. We will try to straighten out some of these little details in our next planning meeting.